Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Leonard is correct. I wasn't down to speak, but there's something about St. George and myself that each time I come here, I'm compelled to say a few words. I stood on this very stage about 2 years ago. Glenn Clark, on the occasion of his nomination, asked me to be his featured speaker. And I sent a message to wider Barbados through this audience about the perilous state that this Barbados was in. And we were suffering and suffering in no small way because we had an ineffective, most inefficient and incompetent leader in Freundel Stuart. I said at the time that there was a crisis of leadership in Barbados, and that if the Barbadian people did not do something about it, that Barbados was slumped from bad to very worse. Some people listen, but not enough persons listen. And I'm not going to stand on any platform while the country continues to slump further and further economically, financially, spiritually, because once Freundel Stuart and that team of bandits remain in charge of this government, this country will continue to suffer spiritually as well. And I'm not going to come on any platform, whether I am asked to speak or I offer myself to speak. And I'm not going to engage in any fancy speeches. Because we had the time for that during the last general election campaign and the period leading up to the general election campaign. And we were far superior when it came to telling the Barbadian people the truth, when it came to giving careful and studied and correct analyses of the Barbados economy, when it came to charting a course, notwithstanding the difficulties in the regional and the national economy, by which we could have moved this economy forward, we were superior than the Democratic Labour Party in doing that. So I will not waste my time in going back over those speeches. Because if you go and you read the Barbados Labour Party's manifesto for the last election, you will see the commitment of a lot of hard work. Some of us who were candidates, some of us who were co-opted. And that document spoke in no uncertain terms as to what we needed to do, and to do as a matter of urgency in order to get us out of this mess once we were returned to power. But the problem is that the Barbadians, they fell for a number of other things, including money. But that is a thing of the past. That is a thing of the past. So I come here to tell you this evening that Dwight is right and Mr. Clark is right. And no amount of fancy talk, and while these incompetent bandits remain in charge, is going to get us out of this mess, because you can see from the latest round of pronouncements that we're going to go further and further and further down in this mess. Dwight spoke about the unions. And let me tell you something. Many years ago, when I was an undergraduate at the University of the West Indies in politics, Professor Neville Duncan, Dr. Duncan at the time, gave us some question about unions and attachments to political parties and things. And some of us were very clear that what we needed in order to move this economy forward was indeed for the unions to act as unions and represent the interests of the workers in the best way possible, and leave the politics directly to the politicians, but the unions should put pressure on the politicians to ensure that policies were put in place to advance the cause in the welfare of those who pay the union dues. And I sat back and I watched. And I listened, sometimes too quiet. And I heard the leaders of the NUPW said that on the eve of the election that they are not going to support the General Secretary, no party that is planning on laying off people. But it was convenient for those wicked folks to say that because this lion rat Chris Sickler had said that Ornafa and Clyde Maskell and Tyrone Brockett and myself had these non-existent meetings at the University of the West Indies to bring hardship to many families by sending home 10,000 people. 10,000 public workers. And I said that there was nothing of the sort. I had not even seen Ornafa at the university, for at least on my side. I had not seen Ornafa at the university. I certainly hadn't seen Tyrone Brockett up there. And when Clyde comes, we discuss the university's business. And that went out as though, never mind we challenged it, and never mind we put this incompetent Minister of Finance who was a compulsive liar in court. And we have not had our day in court yet. So only God knows why it is taking so long for us to get our due reward for someone taking my name and bringing my professional integrity and Owen's and Clyde's and Tyrone's professional integrity and love for people into disrepute in the public domain. But I also saw that the UPW, you wouldn't believe, and a lot of revelations came since the announcement of the sending home people. Because we knew that once the Democratic Labour Party was returned to power, that what they said we will do untruthfully, that is what they were planning to do. So any union leader worth his salt at the head of the NUPW would know that a vicious attack was to be launched on the public workers in this country. But they sat very silent. As a matter of fact, their behavior led some people to believe whose God they were really serving, whether the Democratic Labour Party or the workers who paid them dues. I mean, what's really going on in this country, though? You can imagine when there was this public spat between Dennis Clark, that's his name, and Donald Innes. He said that Donald Innes should keep his mouth shut and not talk about inefficiency amongst public workers, because when he was sending workers from Haynesville and St. James South to the hospital who can work at 9:30 and leave at 11, so that led me to believe that he knew that the workers who were going to the hospital, who were just paying union dues, were indeed very incompetent, had no interest in working for their pay, and he said nothing. It is only when there's this public spat that he's going to tell us that he knew they were incompetent, but he didn't say anything. So that obviously meant whose interest he was serving. Mr. Trotman, who has done his very best for the time, he was the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union. I have heard some things in the last couple of weeks. I mean, it doesn't surprise me. And one of the reasons I am not wasting my time dealing with things that we knew were important for this country is that I, and many a person, including Owen and Clyde, and all of them knew that what is happening now was always on the cards once the Democratic Labour Party was returned to power. Because we predicted it, and I am not wasting time dealing with things that I have predicted because I did my work previous, and they're coming to pass. So those who did not speak, those who didn't want to believe them for reasons best known to them, let them deal with the problems now that they create. But I heard Trotty. You know all that happened now since the announcement. And you can imagine that a group of people sit down with the IMF, give certain commitments to the IMF. The IMF people going on home and going back to Washington and getting on with their business. Commitments were given, announcements were made, and that should be taken as final, and people do what they have to do. But all this grandstanding going on now between these union leaders and seeking to give the workers now who will suffer and who have been suffering by virtue of erosion in their real wages. All this grandstanding will get nobody anyway. The people give the commitments already. And this foolishness about delaying sending home people by 2 weeks and things, that is not supposed to appease anybody because the people are going on the breadline and they're going to suffer. All of the foolishness that's going on in the grandstanding, the public spectacle, these are things that should have happened before the announcements were made. So they can fool people, but they can't fool them because the people will end up suffering. And they're suffering at the hands of the Democratic Labour Party. But this is an exercise in grandstanding and to give the workers the impression that the union leaders care about them. But we care about what? I heard Mr. Trotman say that there is no, he wouldn't advise anybody to march. I heard Dwight mention it. And I said to myself, I know this country has gone literally to nothing now. But what distinguishes now this period from back in 1991? The Democratic Labour Party was in power back then. The economy was taken to its knees back then. Is it because he was on the rise back then? So doing that would have been convenient and helped to propel him in the eyes of all the workers in Barbados? Well, you got almost starting with 3,000 and then it going on to 5,000, you never know where it will end. You got all sorts of fees being introduced onto workers in Barbados. You got poor families and they're going to turn back the hands of socio-economic development by preventing poor people children from coming up to university that Brian himself can teach them. And that isn't a cause for people to rise up and let their feelings known. And this isn't a cause for marching. And we had about 16 or so thousand people get sent home from the private sector in the last term. And only God knows how many have gone within the last year since the election. But there should be some indication, based on those who can study these things carefully, as to how many will go once you unleash that level of retrenchment in the next 2 months or so. You understand what is the knock-on effect of private sector activity and the implications for employment within the private sector of sending home so many people all at once. You know what heat that is going to take out of a struggling Barbadian economy? And the thousands that will go home from the private sector. And this isn't a cause for marching in Barbados. Well, let me tell you something. I don't preach violence, you understand? But I said night after night after night in the general election, the campaign up by me and elsewhere in Barbados, that if politicians in this country, if they can't come to the people with their hearts pure and their hands clean, and if they feel that people who they place on the margins and below, and on the eve of an election, show up with some money and give them, and they help them to get over the line in a slender way, and that some of those same people are now to go home and suffer. And innocent people in the public sector who work for 8, 9, 10 years, who they refused to appoint in the last 6 years, people who went work and work honest just to feed their families, that they're now going to come with some formula that is only known to them to decide who to go home and who not to go home. And those people, families now are supposed to go and suffer. Whereas they went protecting their pensions and they walk around and laugh and continue to lie and take this economy and send it where we hope it will never reach. And that is supposed to be good and proper. So one set of innocent people is supposed to suffer, and wicked people who engineer the suffering of people that they're to go along and smiling sweet. I say to them, Trotty is right. Some will end up in the mental. Some will end up further undernourished. But some will join with the Barbados Labour Party. And we have to ensure, because the root of this mess that this country is in every possible dimension, it didn't start the last election. It started voted when they voted out the Barbados Labour Party in 2008. And I'm going to tell you something. No amount of talk about the Barbados Labour Party not joining with them incompetent bandits, because I said once, and I said numerous times, once this country is run by a slow learner, a slow thinker, and a slow talker, when you assemble those things in one place, you have the wrong person who's the Prime Minister of Barbados. And no amount of talk, circular talk, and getting people who study these issues carefully to talk. And once the Democratic Labour Party remains in power, there will be no confidence in government and governance in this country, and this mess will only be stopped when the Barbadian people turn back to the Barbados Labour Party and get a proper government in place. I thank you.